I'm 30, and my cousin Rachel is 34. She's got two kids, a son Lucas, 10, and a daughter Ella, 7, and a stepdaughter Tilly, who's 5. Rachel has been married to her husband Sam for about 14 years, and they're doing fine financially, never lacking, never stressed about money, but holy hell, they clearly missed the memo about basic parenting. From the very start, Rachel decided she wanted to be that cool mom, the one who lets kids explore their emotions freely and never imposes unfair rules. Translation: no boundaries, zero discipline, and endless chaos. I realized how bad it really was at Lucas's birthday party a few years ago at a trampoline park. I swear, within the first 10 minutes, Lucas decided he didn't like another kid's choice of trampoline spot. So he ran straight at the other kid and shoved him down. When the boy started crying, Rachel leaned over and said, "I see you really wanted that spot, Lucas, and that's okay. Maybe we can figure out a way for everyone to bounce happily." No apology, no, Lucas, that's not acceptable, just a gentle nod at her own son. The other kid's mom stared at her like she'd just watched a crime scene unfold. Family gatherings are another level. At last year's 4th of July barbecue at my aunt's house, Ella decided she hated the potato salad and threw it at my cousin's dog. Rachel didn't scold her or make her clean it up. Nope, she turned to my aunt and asked, "Do you have any more snacks she might like?" When my aunt said no, Sam drove to the nearest convenience store for chips. I stood there watching my 65-year-old aunt mop the floor while Ella giggled as if she'd just won a trophy. Tilly has a special talent for screaming at maximum volume whenever she doesn't get her way. At my cousin's wedding last summer, she threw a tantrum because she wanted to carry the bride's garter pillow. Rachel just marched her up to the altar mid-ceremony, and the bride, looking like she'd seen a ghost, handed it over. Tilly paraded around with it during the vows, grinning like she owned the place. Now, here's my personal struggle. I'm child-free by choice, but I genuinely like kids. With Rachel's crew, every interaction feels like walking blindfolded through a minefield. I've spent hundreds of dollars on birthday trips and toys only for the kids to pitch a fit the second someone says no. The final straw was last month at my own birthday dinner in Chicago. I had booked a fancy Italian place. Rachel insisted on bringing all 3 kids. Within 15 minutes, Lucas was whining about the pasta, Ella was flinging breadsticks at the table, and Tilly had climbed onto the server station to reach the wine rack. I tried asking Rachel to intervene. She just said, "They're expressing themselves." Expressing themselves by terrorizing every adult in sight. When Tilly knocked over my cocktail all over my dress and purse, Rachel laughed. She literally said, "What did you expect wearing red around kids?" I left the restaurant, ruined evening and all, and realized I couldn't keep enabling this nonsense. When Rachel texted me the next week asking what gifts I was getting her kids for Christmas, I told her flat out I wasn't buying them anything. Cue meltdown. She called me, screaming that I was punishing the kids, that I didn't understand parenting, and that I was selfish and cruel. That, Reddit, is the tip of the iceberg. After that phone call, I spent a few days stewing. Rachel was furious, but honestly, I felt some relief. I finally said no. Of course, that didn't stop the chaos from finding me elsewhere. The following weekend, my parents hosted their monthly Sunday brunch. I thought, okay, maybe Rachel will behave if I just keep my distance. I should have known better. From the second we walked in, it was clear this wasn't going to be peaceful. Lucas barreled past the door, nearly knocking over my mom's antique lamp, screaming, "I want the chocolate fountain." Ella followed, carrying a stack of coloring books, loudly complaining that they didn't have the right crayons. Tilly somehow managed to get into the pantry and was opening bags of chips and tossing them around like confetti. Rachel just stood there, phone in hand, scrolling Instagram, occasionally murmuring, "Let's redirect their energy," as if that explained the tornado of destruction happening in her living room. At one point, Lucas decided he didn't like the pancakes my dad made and threw his plate onto the floor. I couldn't watch anymore. I snapped, "Lucas, that's not okay. Clean it up." Rachel's jaw dropped. "Don't yell at him," she said. "He's just expressing himself." I swear my brain short-circuited. I looked at my dad, who was frozen between my command to clean up and Rachel's insistence on permissiveness. My mom gave me this pleading look like she was begging me to bite my tongue and preserve the fragile peace. And then came the straw that broke the camel's back. Tilly decided the cat needed a bath. She grabbed the poor thing by the scruff, and when it hissed, she screamed and dropped it onto the hardwood floor. The cat bolted under the couch, terrified. I yelled at Tilly to stop, and Rachel finally intervened, but instead of reprimanding her daughter, she turned to me and said, "See, you're being dramatic. Kids are curious. Let them explore." I felt like my head was going to explode. Later, when I confronted Rachel privately in the kitchen, she accused me of trying to make her look bad in front of the family. I tried to explain my frustration calmly, pointing out the mess, the screaming, and the outright unsafe behavior. She shot back, "You don't understand. I'm teaching them independence. You're just a bitter, childless aunt who thinks the world should revolve around her comfort." I couldn't even respond without my blood pressure spiking. By the end of the brunch, my parents were exhausted, the kids were sugared up and destructive, and I was ready to disappear into a witness protection program just to escape the judgment and chaos. And yet, Rachel still called me that evening to lecture me about being unsupportive and petty, claiming I was sabotaging her kids' emotional growth. Emotional growth? More like emotional anarchy. That was when I realized something had to change. I couldn't just endure these events passively anymore. Either I set firm boundaries, or I was going to keep losing my sanity and my relationship with my family over a trio of little tyrants raised to think the world exists solely to serve them. The breaking point came 2 weeks later at my friend's wedding in downtown Chicago. I had hoped it would be a calm, child-free event, but Rachel insisted the kids were mature enough to attend. Big mistake. From the moment we walked in, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Lucas immediately ran straight for the wedding cake, yelling that it wasn't big enough and that he deserved his own tier. Ella grabbed a handful of flower petals from the centerpieces and flung them across the ballroom like confetti, smacking a few guests in the process. Tilly, of course, had discovered the decorative fountain and was dipping her hands in, dripping water onto the pristine floor. Rachel, standing by the bar, simply clapped her hands and said, "Wow, look at them exploring," as if chaos was something to celebrate. I tried my best to stay calm, guiding Tilly away from the fountain and telling Ella to pick up the petals she'd thrown. Lucas started whining loudly because I wouldn't let him poke the bride's bouquet. I explained that it wasn't appropriate, that it belonged to the bride, and that he could admire it from a distance. That's when Rachel swooped in, glaring at me. "Stop being controlling. They're kids. Let them feel their feelings." I wanted to scream. Feel their feelings. Her son was screaming at strangers and ruining someone else's wedding. Then came the moment that changed everything. Tilly climbed onto the edge of the fountain and leaned over. My gut screamed, "Danger." I ran over, grabbed her arm, and gently pulled her down. Lucas started yelling, "She's hurting, Tilly. You're mean." Ella joined in, whining that I was ruining their fun. Rachel immediately accused me of being aggressive, saying I physically attacked her child in public and that I was the worst aunt ever. People were staring. Some whispered. Others just looked horrified. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd literally prevented her daughter from falling into a fountain. I took a deep breath and said as calmly as I could, "I am not hurting her. I'm keeping her safe. That's my boundary." Rachel crossed her arms and shot back, "No, your boundary is against my parenting style, and you're trying to control my kids because you're bitter about not having your own." That one landed hard. I realized she wasn't going to see reason today, or any day soon. By the end of the reception, I'd had to remove myself from the chaos entirely. I didn't want to escalate further, but I also knew I couldn't keep enabling this behavior. That night, I texted Rachel that I was done attending events where her kids were present unless boundaries were respected. She replied with a flurry of texts calling me toxic, hateful, and emotionally abusive. I felt guilty. I'd prevented an actual accident, yet I was being painted as the villain. But for the first time in years, I also felt relief.
I had finally drawn a line. It didn't make me popular, it didn't fix the family drama, and it certainly didn't make Rachel happy, but it was a boundary I needed to survive these family interactions without losing my mind. The morning after the wedding, my phone blew up. Rachel had called my parents first, then a few cousins, recounting her version of the fountain incident. According to her, I had yanked Tilly violently in front of everyone and caused a scene that humiliated her family. I tried calling my mom to explain, but she was crying before I even spoke. "How could you do this?" she sobbed. "Everyone is talking about it, and Rachel says you're unstable around children." I froze, realizing this wasn't just Rachel being dramatic, she had actively spun a story to the entire family.
By mid-afternoon, texts and voicemails started piling in from extended relatives I barely see. Some were worried about Tilly, some scolding me for being so harsh toward the kids, and a few more politely asking what had happened. I sent a group message calmly explaining the truth, that I had physically prevented a 5-year-old from falling into a fountain, and that Rachel's accusations were exaggerated. Half the family ignored it, half assumed I was overreacting, and a couple of close cousins quietly replied, saying they'd witnessed the chaos firsthand and agreed I'd been reasonable. Meanwhile, Rachel's friends online were chiming in as well. She had posted a vague Instagram story about toxic relatives causing harm to innocent children, with all her friends commenting supportively. The subtlety was lost on no one. I was clearly the target. My phone vibrated endlessly with notifications, family group chats, friend group texts, even some work colleagues who happened to know me and saw the story. People were forming opinions without hearing my side. It was exhausting and infuriating. I tried to reach Rachel directly to calm things down, hoping we could de-escalate before it got worse. She picked up and immediately started crying and yelling simultaneously. "You humiliate me and my children everywhere you go. Everyone thinks you hate us," she wailed. I said as calmly as I could, "I don't hate your kids. I'm setting boundaries because their behavior is unsafe and destructive. That's it." She accused me of bullying and trying to ruin their lives, which made me realize that reason had left the building. By the evening, my parents called me separately, both pleading for some kind of compromise. They suggested I apologize, or at least acknowledge the kids' feelings so the family wouldn't fracture further. I wanted to scream. I wasn't sorry for preventing a child from injury, but I could feel the guilt settling in anyway, because the rest of the family was in the crossfire. Meanwhile, Rachel texted me later saying she was cutting off contact until I admit I was wrong and that she wouldn't attend any future events I was at. For the first time, I realized the full scope of the problem. My boundary wasn't just about Rachel's parenting. It had become a social minefield. No matter what I did, half the family was going to take sides. And yet, I knew I couldn't back down. If I allowed them to manipulate me into compliance, I would continue to be miserable at every family gathering, watching children run wild and being blamed for doing the sensible thing. By the end of the night, I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through texts and social media mentions, feeling frustrated, sad, and powerless. I hadn't hurt anyone, but I was somehow being treated as the villain. And the worst part? I knew this was just the beginning. Rachel's children would keep behaving the same way, and family events would keep spiraling out of control unless something truly changed. And that something wasn't going to come from me bending to their chaos. A week after the wedding, Rachel decided to drop by my apartment unannounced. I was mid-email when the doorbell rang. My stomach sank. Sure enough, she was standing there, hair slightly mussed, looking like a hurricane had passed through. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside before I could answer. I sighed and motioned to the couch. "Fine, let's talk." Immediately, she launched into a monologue that was part guilt-tripping, part accusation. "I don't know how you can live with yourself. You humiliate my kids at every family event. Lucas is terrified of you now. Tilly told me she thinks you hate her." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to scream that none of it was true, but part of me just wanted to sit quietly and let her vent. "You're twisting everything," I said calmly. "I've never hurt your children.
I stopped Tilly from falling into a fountain. That's literally it. And Lucas, he's been throwing tantrums and hitting people for years. That's not my fault. She flopped onto the couch dramatically. You don't get it. You don't have children, so you can't understand the pressure we're under. You're cruel because you've never experienced unconditional love. I took a deep breath. I could feel my pulse pounding, but I forced myself to remain measured. I do understand love. I just also understand consequences. And your kids never face any. That's it. She started crying, then yelling, then alternating between the two. You're making this personal. You're attacking my parenting. My friends are calling me and asking if my kids are okay, and I don't know what to say. At that moment, I realized something crucial. Nothing I said was going to change her perception. No matter how calm or rational I was, she would always frame me as the villain. So I made a decision. Rachel, here's the deal, I said firmly, sitting up straight. I'm not going to attend any more family events where your kids are present until I know that boundaries are respected. I will no longer enable unsafe or destructive behavior. I love my nieces and nephew, but I cannot keep putting myself in situations where I'm blamed for protecting them or asking for basic courtesy. This is not negotiable.
Her face contorted with disbelief. You're just abandoning us? You're punishing the kids? I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm protecting myself. And I'm also protecting them indirectly. Someone has to show them that actions have consequences. And if that someone can't be you, then at least it won't be me being blamed for doing the right thing. For the first time, she was silent. Just silent. And in that silence, I felt a mix of relief, sadness, and frustration. Relief because I had finally drawn the line. Sadness because I knew this decision would fracture the family further. Frustration because it shouldn't have come to this. Parenting shouldn't be a negotiation with chaos as the default. She eventually stormed out without another word, slamming the door. I leaned back against my couch and let out a long sigh. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that the consequences of this boundary were just beginning, not just with Rachel and her kids, but with the entire family. Weeks passed, and the silence from Rachel was deafening. She hadn't called, texted, or even sent the kids drawings I usually displayed on my fridge. Family gatherings became a minefield of whispered conversations and awkward glances. My parents tried to mediate, but every suggestion felt like walking on thin ice. Maybe just say hi to them, Mom would plead, even if it's awkward. I'd nod politely, but inside I was bracing for another meltdown. The first real test came at my cousin's backyard barbecue. Rachel and the kids were there. I stayed for the early part, enjoying a quiet chat with a few cousins, but as soon as Lucas spotted me, the screaming began. Tilly started running around the pool area, nearly knocking over a cooler. Ella grabbed a hose and began spraying unsuspecting guests. Rachel, of course, did nothing but shout encouragement. I felt my stomach twist. This was exactly why I had set boundaries. I couldn't risk being blamed again. I quietly slipped away, waving a small goodbye. Mom caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded, realizing there was nothing I could do. Rachel's version of reality had become dominant in the family narrative, and I had to accept that my absence might continue to be controversial. Meanwhile, texts from other relatives trickled in. Some offered quiet support, acknowledging they'd noticed the kids' behavior and how impossible it was to manage. Others subtly chastised me, saying I was too rigid or harsh. I realized that no matter how careful or reasonable I was, opinions would remain divided. The truth didn't matter as much as the story people had chosen to believe. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, I reflected on everything. The wedding incident, the fountain, the birthday dinner chaos, the endless tantrums and manipulations. I had finally stood up for myself. I had said, clearly and firmly, this is my boundary. Did it hurt to be seen as the villain? Absolutely. Was it lonely to watch parts of my family rally behind Rachel? Yes. But for the first time, I felt some measure of control over my own life and sanity. I knew this wasn't a fairy tale ending. Some family members would continue to misunderstand. Rachel would likely never acknowledge her kids' behavior as problematic, and tensions would persist at every holiday and birthday. But I also knew that I had expressed my perspective honestly, without cruelty, and I had protected both myself and the children in the process. And maybe, just maybe, one day the family would see it that way too. Until then, I would keep my boundaries firm, my conscience clear, and my apartment free from chocolate milk disasters. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was real. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.